Conversations with Robert Meyer Burnett.
I've heard it said before, like, it was a very smart man named Robert Meyer Burnett who said the currency of our current age is authenticity. And it's so true.
I was off duty, sitting in my buddy Barney Ross's Speak at Van Buren in Plymouth, drinking rum out of a coffee cup when two guys shouldered in, looking like hoodlums. I was almost right. It was Mayor Cermak's bagman bodyguards, Harry Lang and Harry Miller, the two Harrys. His Honor's two-man hoodlum squad, heavy set and as anonymous as a couple gorillas at Lincoln Park Zoo, only uncaged.
Hiya, Red. Heard young out here.
Red wasn't my name. Heller was. Nathan Heller. Nate to my friends, who these two definitely were not. Miller was cleaning the fog off his Coke bottle glasses. I knew him a little. Lang, too. We were all Maxwell Street boys. They were just older, and fatter, and even more dishonest.
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi and cinema, your evangelist of the imagination, and of course, the perhaps never to be defined existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, me, Robert Meyer Burnett, and I am Robcasting at you from the Robservatory. You, imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. This is, of course, Robservation's episode number 990. Woo! Got to start scheduling that 1,000th show. You know, I decided it's going to be about you. It's going to be about you, imagination connoisseurs. I want to schedule people. I'm going to have to start taking applications. I want you to tell me what you want to talk about. I want to have people on for like half an hour at a time, maybe. Going to do a 1,000-minute show. That's 16 hours. That's right, 16 hours. Can I make it? I don't know. We'll see. Maybe. We'll see. I've never done a 16-hour show before. Unless I've fallen asleep. Then I guess you could add to the time, which only happened once, to be fair. To be honest, it did happen once. What are you going to do? Anyway. So this episode, I want to start by reading a letter from our own Major Chai Chai. And I'm fascinated by this because, as you know, there hasn't been a lot of material in theaters, not enough to fill them all the time. So they've been showing classic movies that a lot of people haven't seen, bringing back those classics. And our own Major Chai Chai took her kids to see Blazing Saddles. Of course, a film that many people would probably want to see canceled today. Definitely, it's humor from another time. Great humor, one of the funniest movies ever made, I think, but a lot of people just probably would thumb their nose at it, but it truly is a great film. And she wrote us a letter. Major Chai Chai talks about, well, I'll let her take it away. This is from Major Chai Chai. Robert, you asked for a report on taking my kids to see Blazing Saddles in the theater. Well, here it is. My children were the youngest people in the theater. There were a handful of Gen Z total in the theater, as well as millennials. The rest of the audience were boomers and us Gen Xers. The split was 60-40 males to females. In total, there were about 60 people in a 220-plus seat theater on a Sunday afternoon. I had already introduced my children to Mel Brooks movies, so they were familiar with his style and sense of humor. In fact, I came home one day last week to find my son watching Robin Hood, Men in Tights. Ooh, it's not great. Like everyone in the theater, my kids laughed throughout the movie. Although my husband said he noticed my daughter being unsure about laughing at certain parts. My son had no such hesitation. What I noticed is that some jokes went over my son's head because of the historical references. In particular, the Randolph Scott joke and the Lily von Stupp singing with the German bad guys. I had also tried to watch the audience for their reactions, but Blazing Saddles is so filled with great jokes and gags that I gave up and surrendered myself to the movie. Now, as I'm reflecting on the afternoon's family excursion, I'm a little saddened. Why? because we don't have any current or new side-splitting comedies like Blazing Saddles to bring us together while we laugh at ourselves. Also because there were not more younger people in the theater to discover a classic. Well, at least I got to make this memory with my family. Yours truly, Major Chai Chai. Always great to hear from you, Major Chai Chai. She writes great letters, and she truly was a major, so that's exciting. I think you touched on something. I mean, again, we live in a world where the business of motion picture studios has changed. I talked about this a lot on this channel. It used to be primarily the studio's business was to make movies for the domestic market, and they would make a much more diverse slate of the kinds of movies they were making. Dramas, thrillers, romances, whether they were dramatic romances or rom-coms, a lot of comedies. Comedies were like the bread and butter of Hollywood. I mean, you go back and you look at 40 years ago, Beverly Hills Cop was one of the highest grossing movies of the year. But now studios are not doing that. Studios are making movies for the global marketplace, which I can understand. But unfortunately, that leaves dramas and comedies sort of, certain, we're seeing a few outliers. Things are coming back. If they have Glenn Powell in them, or Sylvia Sweeney. So maybe they can come back, but a movie like Blazing Saddles, how about a person like Mel Brooks, who, when he was doing The 1,000-Year-Old Man with Carl Reiner and going back all the way into his career and how many movies he's made, the parodies he did of even Hitchcock doing High Anxiety. He, of course, did Young Frankenstein, which is probably one of my favorite Mel Brooks movies. He had a whole career making people laugh. And nowadays, not so much. I think part of the reason is we really, since the advent of social media, people take themselves way too seriously. In order to make an effective comedy, you have to be willing to laugh at yourself. And I think we've become much more, way too navel-gazing, way too self-important, and which is too bad. And, of course, Blazing Saddles hit hard when it came to race relations, and now we have no sense of humor about that anymore. In a way, I think that we have been, again, infantilized. To be able to laugh at yourself requires a level of maturity that I think our civilization has lost. And that's too bad, because I think understanding the human experience from all of our perspectives, now we're so divided. What comedy relies on is our shared understanding of human experience. It doesn't matter, what race, size, color, creed you are. We all have things that are kind of funny about being human beings. That's why fart jokes will always be funny. And that's why, sometimes some people don't think they're funny, but Blazing Saddles, of course, has one of the great fart moments in any movie ever. And the baked beans moment. And if you've seen the movie, you know. And by the way, it is coming out on a beautiful 4K disc in a big special edition if you want to buy it. But yeah, it's sort of too bad. I'd like to see comedies come back. But, again, people don't have much of a sense of humor anymore. And, you can't do that. You can't say that. Everybody's so pointing their fingers, telling us what we can and can't. Look, to be alive is to be a human being, is to be inherently goofy or silly, or you have to mock our lives of quiet desperation. Always. Everybody's life can be mocked. Nobody is above the law of mocking. And more than ever, I watch social media today, and I wish somebody like Mel Brooks would point a lens at today's social media, because, oh boy, would that be fun to see. But anyway, Blazing Saddles, if you haven't seen it, you get a chance to see it. So there you go. I have a tip. Now, on my last Robservations, I was mispronouncing filmmaker Leni Riefenstahl's last name. And of course, if you watch Let's Get Physical Media, Dieter Bastian, who's from Germany, made a note of it and made a point of showing me that it's pronounced Leni Riefenstahl, not Riefenstahl. I don't know why I'm saying it like that. But anyway, Leni Riefenstahl has sent me a tip. And Leni Riefenstahl says, this is bad. Lenny. Okay, you sent me a tip, and I was just talking about ribald humor, so here we go. Lenny says, Rob, this is so bad. This is so bad. Rob, I'm going to get canceled for this joke, but Lenny Riefenstahl sent it to me. Okay. Lenny Riefenstahl says, Rob, if you'd been making movies in Germany in the 1940s, I'd have let you come inside my gas chamber. That is bravo. Bravo. But I do appreciate that sentiment because that's always fun. What you meant, not the actual. Anyway, the illusions. Bravo to you. Bravo to you. And if anybody wants to send me those kinds of jokes, please don't. That's a tough one. I could barely get that out. But since you sent a tip in, and that was an audacious joke, I bet you just wanted to see how far you could push me. That's a good one, though. I've never heard that before. That was bad, but good at the same time. Which brings me to the task, the subject at hand. As many of you know, ever since I read about The Substance, being at the Cannes Film Festival, I was very, very excited about it. As I've said before on this channel, is anyone still watching after that joke? As I've said, obviously the horror genre is one of my favorite genres of all. I grew up reading a lot of hardcore dark fantasy and outright horror. And one of my favorite sub-genres, I mean, you could make an argument that there is an element of body horror in every horror story, in a way. Because at the end of the day, really, the basis for all... I mean, first of all, I love the horror genre because it deals with the inevitability. I mean, obviously, what looms large over almost every horror story is death. Is the idea that to be born is to die. And the thing is, when human beings die and you live a long life, you wind up in decrepitude. And as you get older, as Pris might say in Blade Runner, it becomes accelerated decrepitude. That's kind of what happened to the replicants. And it's horrifying. The idea that our bodies will eventually end up betraying us happens to us all. So I've always been, and the thing that I've been fascinated, one of the things that fascinates me is the idea that we as human beings, who and what we are, how we perceive ourselves, is not necessarily, I mean, everybody has body issues, and I'm sure, but or gender dysmorphia, as we hear about now. But for me, I've always been fascinated by the fact that our consciousness, our souls, our spirits, call it what you want, our intellect exists in these meat sacks that can always revolt against us. And everything we are, everything how we perceive ourselves, it doesn't matter what kind of a person you are, it doesn't matter how much money you have, at some point, these fleshy meat sacks that carry our essence around in them are going to fail and be the cause of our demise. Unless, the singularity comes and we can download our consciousness into a mainframe. Please allow me to do that and put me on a generational ship and let me run it for 100 years while we go to another planet. I hope I can make it that far. I don't think I will, but if you can, please, let me do that. So if I die in anyone's arms that is watching this right now, make sure my consciousness gets downloaded into some mainframe and send me on a generational ship where I have enough sensors where we finally get to a new world I could see it. That would be fantastic. I would love that. And not in a to serve man kind of a way. You know what I mean? But so I've always been fascinated by this idea. And the body horror genre, I mean, mad scientists, Dr. Frankenstein using body parts to create new life. I mean, there's so much body horror going on. Alien, of course, a thing implanting an embryo inside of you and have your chest bursting out, zombies. A subgenre of body horror that I love is disease vectors, anything. Give me The Crazies, give me 28 Days Later, give me Dawn of the Dead, give me The Stand. I love all that stuff. But before I get more into opining, I found an article, go figure, that is about that defines the body horror genre. And it was, of course, my go-to when I find genre articles on Medium. I figured I would read this article so we could have like a common ground. So when I'm talking about body horror, you kind of know where I'm coming from. So this was written back in 2022, and it was written by Carlos Gonzalez Softner. Body horror, Beyond the Flesh, the elegance of body horror. The most gruesome genre is also the most flexible. Horror is one of the most flexible genres. It's not only about the vast spectrum of subgenres within it, from found footage to slashers, nor the myriad of stories directors can tell, from creature features to psychological thrillers, but the universality of the medium. Filmmakers have countlessly extrapolated horror themes and techniques to different genres, even those that are anything but terrifying, like romantic comedies, Warm Bodies, or musicals, Anna and the Apocalypse. Still, viewers rarely appreciate horror movies beyond their entertainment factor. The thrill of a zombie apocalypse or the deadly jump scare of a serial killer is enough for one to disregard any profound themes. Indeed, this is the case for plenty of these films and series. The traps in the Saw franchise can be surprisingly imaginative, but one's left to ask whether there's still any meaning behind the slaughter. Oh, but there is. We can make the same point for the dozens of horror films released every year on streaming platforms that, while amusing, don't improve the genre's reputation. The case has been the same from a critical perspective. Regardless of notable exceptions like Silence of the Lambs and Get Out, which won Best Picture and Best Original Screenplay Academy Awards respectively, horror directors struggled to gain acclaim beyond special effects and makeup. For years, we seem to have collectively agreed to celebrate the gruesome aspects and not the ideas behind them. That changed a few months ago at the 2021 Cannes Film Festival, where Julia Ducournau's Titane became the first horror film to win the Palme d'Or. Her win was a revolution at Cannes, as horror films have historically been too controversial or repulsive to win such accolades. Think 2009's Antichrist or 2016's The Neon Demon. The one that got the closest was Crash in 1996 by David Cronenberg, to whom the jury awarded a special prize, allegedly because Francis Ford Coppola couldn't bring himself to give it the Palme d'Or. However, Titane has a uniquely identifying trait that makes it more memorable than other horror films. While it's not what one would call scary, the movie is a select member of a genre often too extreme to be respected: body horror. What is body horror? Researcher and author Xavier Aldana Reyes defines body horror as a subgenre involving the inscription of horror onto the human body by virtue of change. These transformations often imply extreme modifications or physical damage to the characters. Mutilation, hybridization, the metamorphosis are recurring themes for body horror directors. What body horror does, if we are calling it a genre, is put flesh on ideas. For me, it's like fairy tales, says Mark Kermode. At first glance, these films look unnecessarily repulsive. Raw blood for the sake of entertainment and shock factor. However, if we take a closer look, we might see how this extreme external appearance reflects elaborate social and ideological issues. Beyond the limbs, flesh, and distortions, body horror can be elegant, encouraging, and even a complex metaphor for topics considered taboo. My goal in this story is to present body horror as a great medium whose delicate and intelligent portrayal deserves high praise. Sexuality. Sex is a complicated topic to depict on film, perhaps because it's sometimes a sensitive subject to address in real life too. The approach filmmakers take to cover teenage romance and sexuality can't be the same for full-grown adults, not to mention more specific issues like fetishes or sexual orientation conflicts. Sexual awakening, in particular, involves a myriad of aspects like friendship or body insecurities, thus increasing the number of stories viewers can experience. Male sexual discovery is often portrayed as comical or adventurous. See American Pie. Early sexual experiences as captivating and life-changing. But sex isn't always glamorous or fun. Social constructs around virginity can exert extreme psychological pressure, and first-time sex can be an overwhelming, if not dreadful, experience. The projection of these insecurities onto the physique is a frequent motive in body horror. A recent example of this is Julia Ducournau's Raw from 2016, which follows veterinary student Justine. Although raised as a vegan, her sister forces her to eat rabbit meat to integrate with the other students. Gradually, her taste transitions from animals to human flesh. However, this film is not the tale of a newly born cannibal. It's the story about sexual exploration. Ducournau isn't merely following Justine on her journey into cannibalism, but into her first sexual ventures. Her animal instincts and hunger are similar to newly awakened sexual cravings. She compares her first bite of human flesh to a first time. Thrilling, dangerous, perhaps addictive, and at worst, she gets caught. The scene of an innocent student devouring her sister's finger represents an extreme, almost raw sensation, not necessarily romanticized. When asked about the parallelisms to sexuality, the French director was adamant in her defense of an unusual depiction of the topic. For me, sexuality is in the body, and you should certainly not be a victim. It's not something that you go through, it's something that you're active in, and it's perfectly okay. Julia Ducournau said that for the BFI. Indeed, nothing better than the body, the discomfort, and the meat to explain physical changes and awakenings. Why should Justine feel guilty about sex when she can dominate her appetite instead? Her first hookup is everything but romantic. She bites her partner. Her loss of virginity isn't a life-changing memory, but an interrupted lunch. Sexual desire is not something to be ashamed of, and she is starving for it. Her introduction to cannibalism is her entrance into adulthood and the responsibility to cope with her emotions and hunger. Society will frequently find this sexual behavior repulsive, similar to the appalling cannibalistic imagery in the film. The body horror shows there is no reason to feel disgusted, and we should welcome our cravings. Gender constructs. Associations between sexuality and body horror are, to some extent, straightforward, as both are physical concepts with external effects on the body. Social constructs are more challenging to handle since their abstraction increases the difficulty of explaining their meaning through a biological transformation. Moreover, in the case of gender roles and stereotypes, directors must translate confusing and controversial dilemmas from the mind of the characters into a tangible impact on their physiques. Although it would be wrong to reduce the movie to a single theme, one of the most remarkable aspects of Titane was how Julia Ducournau used body horror to play with gender stereotypes. The film follows Alexia, a female dancer who has a metal plate inserted into her head after a car crash. More than human, Alexia is physically and mentally a hybrid between human and machine, leaning heavily towards the latter side, which shows in her an attraction to metal objects, such as cars and piercings. However, Alexia's attraction to machines goes beyond mechanophilia. She rejects any identification with humanity, hence with her human body too. This horrific scenario manifests in the lack of physical control as her body starts dripping motor oil after being impregnated by a car. The violent mistreatment she inflicts on herself to pass as a male symbolizes gender dysphoria. Transgender people sometimes share the same sensations as Alexia, like non-identification with body attributes and disaffection from associated gender constructs. Of course, this is not to say that Alexia is transgender, but she mirrors the fluidity and horrific nature of gender constraints. The other main character, Vincent, is the contrasting embodiment of body horror. Unlike Alexia, he cannot escape from unrealistic male body standards. Vincent boosts his masculinity by injecting steroids to the point his physique does not look muscular, but deformed. He aims to protect himself from the sorrow of his missing son at the expense of biological destruction. There is a critical sub-meaning to Vincent. It's the true horror imposed by toxic masculinity and gender standards. Metamorphosis as self-development. Metamorphosis is a recurring analogy in body horror. Shocking biological transformations offer some of the most meaningful scenes of the genre, and they're a fascinating way to portray transitions in moral attitudes. These physical changes range from the deterioration of the body or its substitution for monstrous features to favorable enhancements of human abilities. David Cronenberg's remake of The Fly is one of the first cases. The film follows Seth, who has successfully invented the teleporting machine, and while being interviewed for a newspaper article, he falls in love with the journalist, Veronica, and they begin a beautiful relationship. Accidentally acting out of jealousy, Seth mixes his DNA with that of a housefly. The film works as a twisted fairy tale about a breakup. There is more than one way couples can deal with personal growth. Initially, Veronica is in awe of the modifications in Seth's body, and both sides adapt smoothly to his new lifestyle. But Seth progressively deteriorates, not only physically, but mentally. His body develops bug-like attributes, indicating that Seth isn't himself anymore. That's an understatement. Still, Veronica struggles to abandon her relationship, just like we can blind ourselves to the flaws of our emotional connections. No matter how many pieces of Seth rot or how disgusting, personality and body-wise, he appears, Veronica is always willing to give him a last chance. The famous, "I can change him." It takes a monstrosity to end true love, as Seth has to turn into a monster for her to realize their romance is doomed. Titane likewise addresses self-development and love through metamorphosis, almost in the opposite way of Cronenberg. Alexia finds in Vincent motivation to embrace her humanity, while Vincent reduces the extreme harm he performs in his body. Their journey comes to an end when Alexia gives birth to a pure hybrid between human and machine, possibly a transhuman, the evolved version of Alexia and Vincent, taking only the best from them. For de Coronel, biological transformations are the perfect analogies for identity transitions. I was aware that my body could mutate in unexpected ways and have autonomy. So, are you your body, or is your body you? This is the kind of thing I always thought about. What does it mean in terms of identity? And that was Julia de Coronel talking to Alex Godfrey. Repression and guilt. Ever heard of the expression eaten up with guilt? Sensations like this practically inhabit the normal functioning of the body. When guilt is eating one from the inside, body horror finds the perfect ground to reflect the fear or shame of one's own actions. Similarly, repression and the contention of one's identity are visceral sensations horror might well translate into the physical. Self-censorship is central in Stephen Dunn's Closet Monster from 2015. The film is a rare gem in body horror, as it is not a terrifying thriller but a coming-of-age story. The plot revolves around Oscar, a gay teenager who, as a child, witnesses a brutal homophobic crime where somebody is impaled by a metal rod. That traumatic experience restrains him from embracing his sexuality. Interiorized homophobia creates such a repugnance in Oscar that any image of homosexuality becomes a brutal manifestation of an impaling metal rod. In his first sexual experience, his stomach reacts by expulsing screws, showing the guilt and shame he experiences. Body horror techniques excel when Oscar eventually accepts his sexuality and courageously rips out the trauma-ridden rod from his abdomen. Once a symbol of blatant homophobia, the weapon becomes a tool for Oscar to lock up his fears for good. That graphic coming out scene, painful but relieving, was Dunn's most loyal approximation to his experience with his sexuality. I remember when I first came out, that feeling of exhaustion and pain, like ripping off a really horrible Band-Aid on a really hairy part of your skin. It felt painful to come out, but after I did it, I felt so empowered. And that was Stephen Dunn talking to Alex Heaney. Indeed, remorse in body horror is frequently painfully excreted. In the Dutch Netflix show Aries from 2020, members of an elite government organization throw out a black liquid-covered egg embodying the accumulated shame from the horrid crimes they committed to reach their social position. By removing their guilt, they can preserve their social status. During the series finale, protagonist Rosa jumps into a pool of that black liquid and evolves into the personification of their guilt. Embracing their remorse, Rosa takes it on to the members who gruesomely kill themselves at the site of their crimes. Satire and true horror. No one can deny the extremity and repulsiveness of body horror transformations. Still, directors frequently encourage audiences to look beyond the radical imagery to discover the normalization of horrific aspects of society. In Videodrome from 1983, David Cronenberg made a statement against censorship and collective blindness as the dysfunctional mechanisms of civilization. True horror is not the physical transformation of our main character, nor the fusion between humans and technology. Poverty, censorship, or corruption are the extreme monstrosities we normalize through television. For the director, society is to blame for its deterioration, not film. If violent imagery did provoke violence, then everyone would be violent because we're constantly bombarded by violent imagery at one time or another. And David Cronenberg said that in Long Live the New Flesh. There's some truth to the claim that society voluntarily surrounds itself with horror. For instance, Hansel and Gretel is practically a bedtime story about a cannibal who kidnaps two innocent children, while The Little Mermaid follows a mermaid who develops a pair of legs at the cost of her voice. Perhaps body horror is unrightfully held to higher standards than other genres. I grew up watching horror movies almost every weekend. Any example would do the job, especially if it had cheap or laughable special effects and storylines. I would find myself guessing what terrible decision would lead a character lacking any personality to their death, wondering whether a shark-tornado hybrid was scientifically possible, or watching civilization crumble into the millionth zombie apocalypse. Horror was nothing more than entertainment, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. There is a gripping element, be it the impossible scenarios or the jump scares, turning these movies into an experience for me to relax and enjoy for 90 minutes. As you may have discovered by now, it was Titane that opened my mind to the art of body horror. I could never have expected to find such diverse and elegant use of the most repulsive images. Who could have thought that complex analyses of social constructs existed beyond rotting flesh and unbelievable transformations? Some of the metaphors are the most creative and intelligent I've had the pleasure of witnessing, and they deserve greater critical and social recognition. Whether or not the Cornhouse win marks a new beginning for body horror, I'll be celebrating this magnificent genre. So I figured that was a pretty good overview of body horror. But I would say this. For me, one of the things, maybe it was because I started young. My first experience, I was saying this on our member call today, to really seeing my first body horror movie was David Cronenberg's, well, it was called They Came From Within in this country, a.k.a. Shivers was what most people know it as. And that was his first theatrical feature film. And it came out in, believe it or not, 1975. Now, Cronenberg had been dealing with body horror issues as a student. He made movies like From the Drain, Crimes of the Future, and Stereo. Crimes of the Future, his student version, with Ron Molodzik. One of his student films, if you can find it, this character, Anton Rouge, you just got to see it. You just got to experience his movies. But so I went and saw a guy named Bud Warner, took me to see Motel Hell. And the second feature was at a drive-in. The second feature was They Came From Within. I was 13, and my mind was fucking blown by They Came From Within because the movie opens with a very young-looking girl naked on a table and a portly gentleman without a shirt on coming over and using a scalpel and slicing her entire sternum. And you don't necessarily see the slice, but you see him do it, and you see blood start to pour out. And then he takes acid, and he starts pouring it into her body. Now, I'm 13 years old, and I'm thinking, this is the best fucking thing I've ever seen in my fucking life. And I had never seen anything like this before. I mean, I'd seen Dawn of the Dead, which had extreme violence, but the immediate thing was this young girl who was nude. You know, obviously I like the boobies, and you're thinking, what's going on? And immediately you're watching something happen to a human body that just shouldn't. Somebody that's alive and bleeding, you don't know what's going on in this film. Well, if you haven't seen They Came From Within, They Came From Within is set in a very fancy Canadian, outside of Toronto apartment complex that has everything you need. Like it's got a doctor's office, it's got stores, you never have to leave. It's kind of like recently, if you've seen the Tom Hiddleston movie based on the J.G. Ballard book, High Rise, something like that. Imagine that, but in the mid-'70s. And what happens is there is a doctor who's been doing experiments, and he's created a parasite which basically looks like a disembodied penis. And these parasites get in you, and what they're supposed to do is replace damaged organs, and they mutate into what they want, what that organ is, to take their place to keep people alive. Well, it turns out that as things like this are wont to do, these things get inside you through whatever orifice they can find. They get into your body and they start pumping you full of whatever that basically turns you into a sex maniac. And the great Barbara Steele is in this movie, and so this entire apartment complex, because a lot of people are fucking each other, are spreading this parasite. And the parasite, you see them, they're like this big. And so obviously there's the venereal disease metaphor. There's all kinds of things going on, and it turns people into everybody wants to fuck everybody else. So, and I'm 13 years old watching this going, this is, and it's very low budget. But I didn't care. Like back then, it was the concepts in it were blowing my mind. And I'm watching this. It was both exciting and repulsive. I was sexually aroused by it and also disgusted. And I mean, there's one of the most memorable scenes is one of these things comes, Barbara Steele's enjoying a glass of wine as she sits in her bathtub. And one of these parasites comes up from the drain And she's just sitting there chilling out and does not notice this thing is going right between her legs. And of course, the inevitable does in fact happen. But that movie made such an impression on me because it was so, my 13-year-old self had never seen, I mean, it's one thing to get bitten by zombies and the Hells of Poppin' violence and Dawn of the Dead was extreme and I'd never seen anything like that. But I was a horny kid, but I hadn't seen anything like this. And I hadn't seen any pornography or anything at 13 yet. I'd seen nudie mags, but not even like Hustler. There was no Pink, Bush. I got 70s Bush. That's all I got. And so to see this kind of movie at this point in my life was it was fucking mind blowing. And then the movie also has an apocalyptic ending. So if I didn't already think it was the greatest movie I'd ever seen in this genre, then at the end, the world's going to come to an end. It was, or maybe. And so this movie put the zap on me. And I'd never seen anything like it, but there were so many questions that I had about how the human body is so fragile and how it can be altered and how it can be changed by people. And what does that lead to? And you know, it also started me on a journey. I wouldn't call it a journey about sexuality, my own, but to understand human sexuality in general. And one of the things that I remember thinking when I was a kid, because I also had my first girlfriend at the time, we were like making out and stuff. And what I always thought was really interesting is when we as human beings are actually participating, when you're kissing somebody or actually now having sex, we are locked into how we see. So when you kiss somebody, you close your eyes, you're close up, you can't, you know, and until maybe that was my fascination with the feminine form. I mean, I loved getting up close and personal with all of it and seeing and caressing and feeling the feminine form because you can only see it from a certain perspective. And I think that, and no one really talks about this, but I think that's the appeal. Like the funny thing about sex and sexuality is so much of it's happening in our heads. And especially when you're participating in it, you can't, I mean, unless you're going to set up cameras and watch yourselves on TV and stuff. But for the most part, it's up close and personal. And yet when you're watching it, there's a totally different experience, which is why I think the proliferation of cameras and stuff has probably changed human sexuality forever. But then you pervert sexuality with the addition of, you make it monstrous. That becomes a huge part of body horror. You know, vagina dentata and all that. All the horror that can come out of sexuality and what can happen to the body, all of that was in They Came From Within, and I was just like, oh my God, you know. And it was, and now people, it's really, you guys can go seek it out, you can find it, but I have a 4K German media book of it, and I've got the Arrow Blu-ray of it and stuff. The problem is, if you go back and you watch Shivers, I would warn all of you, I think it's a great movie, but it's incredibly low budget. It looks incredibly low budget, and a lot of people are immediately turned off by that. They're like, oh my God, this movie is so low budget. It looked like it cost 6 cents. But I think it was the Tom Berman and the Berman Studios. The creature effects work is actually really good in it. But I would say as an artifact, for me, I began my body horror film journey with Cronenberg's They Came From Within. I still love the movie. I think the tone holds up because it's not played for laughs. I mean, there's humor in it, as there is in most body horror films. But for me, it was hugely influential in my life because it was transgressive. It made me think about things I'd never thought about before. It certainly made, I mean, I was a guy that was just kissing a girl for the first time, really on a regular basis. The same girl. It was pretty great. But it was also leading me down another dark path about human sexuality at the same time as my, you know, coming into my own and all that. It was a really interesting experience seeing that film. And then, of course, after that, I was lucky. Scanners, I want to say Scanners came out in 81. And before Scanners, so Scanners, there was a theater in downtown Seattle called the Coliseum Theater. And before Scanners came out, the Coliseum Theater was playing They Came From Within, Cronenberg's second film, Rabid, and his third body horror film, The Brood. They didn't include Fast Company, his car racing movie, because it wasn't body horror. And then they were going to show Scanners. So I got a bunch of my friends, I don't remember how many, but, you know, I promised them gore and stuff, and we were like 13, 14 years old. Are they going to let us into the theater? I had to like go down the line and find somebody that would get me and all my friends in. but my mind was further blown because Rabid, his second body horror movie that starred Marilyn Chambers, a porn star, and then the movie that struck me the most, that still to this day, this is in 81, so this is 43 years ago, was Cronenberg's The Brood. And if you've never seen The Brood, it is a body horror film that is completely outlandish, but the idea, as Cronenberg's movies have in them, the central idea of The Brood is there is a doctor named Hal Raglan, played by Oliver Reed, and he has created an idea, a therapy, mental therapy, called psychoplasmics. Great fucking term. Great Cronenbergian idea. And so what Hal Raglan does is he tries to get you to deal with your trauma. And through psychoplasmics, your trauma takes physical form and you expel it from your body. So people get weird, like this one guy has this giant cancerous growth on his neck, and Hal Raglan's, so that's what he does. And then there's this couple, Samantha Eggar is the mother. There's this couple, very, very nice, beautiful, handsome guy, beautiful woman, couple that is completely estranged in their marriage because the wife is fucking nuts. And the wife is up at this institute studying with Hal Raglan. And I don't want to tell you exactly what happens. If you don't know what happens, her way of dealing with trauma and what she's externalizing, let's just say, is quite interesting. And it in one of the great, I mean, nowadays everybody's seen everything. But let me tell you, back then I didn't know anything about The Brood. I don't think I'd seen anything about it in Fangoria magazine because it was only 2 years old at that point or whatever. There was a reveal in The Brood that it was one of the most exciting, disgusting, horrible things I'd ever seen, but one of the most transgressive things I've ever seen. Again, I was 14 at this point, and I was looking at this going, this is fucking amazing. I mean, the ideas that I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And it instilled in me, Cronenberg instilled in me a lifelong love of the idea of body horror. The body revolting, not being revolting, but revolting against, like on a revolt, like a political or military revolt or something, against the human body, the mind, the spirit, the consciousness, whatever. I became totally obsessed with these ideas, and I still am to this day. I still am. The idea of body horror, and there's so much body horror, not just in zombies or diseases, reanimating dead flesh. I mean, all that. All kinds of body horror, but my favorite body horror is the most like we're in the real world. And this is what Cronenberg would do. We're in the real world, but his ideas were so outlandish. He would take these incredibly dark fantasy ideas, monstrous ideas. Like as another example, in Rabid, if you've never seen Rabid, the movie he made after They Came From Within with Marilyn Chambers, woman gets in a motorcycle accident and she has to have reconstructive surgery again at a clinic. And so they skin graft her and stuff to fix her up so she was burned in the accident. And because this skin graft, remember I always say that there's one ask that a movie asks you. So because of this skin graft, this woman develops a stinger that looks like a phallus that comes from under her arm, and she develops a craving for blood. So it's a body horror vampire movie, and then she picks up rough trade on the streets of Toronto, like in an adult theater. She'll start making out with a dude and sting them and drink their blood out of this fucking crazy thing. And then what she doesn't realize is she's passing along, she's basically giving them rabies when she's doing that. And of course that becomes a problem in Greater Toronto. And while I didn't love the Brood, I didn't love Rabid as much because it's okay. It was kind of a modern take on the vampire myth. But the turning everybody into rabid zombie, people that after having their way with her, there was a lot going on there, but it wasn't as good as They Came From Within and certainly The Brood. And then Cronenberg went on, as they said in this article, to go make his body horror movies, whether it was Videodrome and The Fly, which is probably the Star Wars of body horror movies. And then, of course, what I think is Cronenberg's... The Fly is probably his most populist movie in terms of being popular with audiences, but my favorite is probably Dead Ringers. But he's continued on to make Crash. Obviously, I love Crash. And lately, he's moved back into body horror. The Shrouds, for instance, that he has coming out, is about a guy who he buries people and he puts cameras so you can watch your loved ones decompose. Different kind of a body horror film, but still dealing with the idea of our flesh and bones and our intellect and what happens when it decays. So I haven't seen The Shrouds yet. Can't wait to see it. I'm still just happy he's making movies. Anyway, body horror. I'll watch anything. And we've been getting a lot of really interesting body horror lately, not just raw, but the French ladies, let me tell you, Julia Ducournau, and of course, a woman I'm about to talk about, modern, I mean, leave it to these French female directors who are killing it. You know, we've seen, I think women have a unique perspective to bring to body horror because, one, they literally can do something I can't do, which is gestate a living creature inside of them, a parasitic, and everything that comes along with that, and you know, even their sexuality, taking something into them, unless, you know, or however you're going to do that. I mean, we can do that too. It can be fun if you're going to celebrate International Women's Day, but it's a whole different thing. You know, you're dealing with a whole different thing, you know, and we as men, if you're like myself and you like to be a cunning linguist, to face the river of life, so to speak, and to dive right in. I mean, all of that stuff plays into body horror in a really interesting way. And I've been completely fascinated with it. And it's also like, it also instilled in me a love of the human form. Straight, you know, I'm a straight guy, but I love nothing more than to see beautiful bodies optimized for performance, whether it's athletes, whether, take your pick, dancers, watching ballet, for instance. I'm stunned by what people can do, both men and women, what the human body can do optimized. It's an amazing thing. And I think, I don't know, I guess a love of body horror, I can say, has instilled in me a great love of human beings. And I don't know if that's a byproduct or what. I guess I'm getting, maybe TMI, I'm getting a little too psychological here on a Saturday night. I haven't even had a drink of my pre-mixed cocktail. Why not at this point? Hey. So, I gotta say, coming out of Cannes, I heard about the movie The Substance. Now, for me, Mr. Body Horror, this was like, so I've talked a lot about the thing that interested me when I would see a horror novel on the shelf or a science fiction novel on the shelf or a movie or something, especially when it came to science fiction, fantasy, and horror. I needed some kind of an intellectual hook, an idea, like fantasy movies, kids getting magical powers, that doesn't interest me. There has to be something that was somehow unique, that had some kind of I wanted to know what the answer to the question the book or the movie was promising to delve into. And it's always been that way for me. I'll see anything, but the thing that I get excited about is something that has an intellectual hook. So I didn't know anything about The Substance, and the director is Coralie Fargeat. And here's the thing about the director of The Substance. She is a consummate filmmaker. She went through multiple French film schools. She started making short films. She really learned her craft for the better part of 25 years, basically. And she's only made 2 feature films. I believe she directed an episode of The Sandman. But she's a true dyed-in-the-wool, purebred filmmaker, consummate filmmaker. And her first film that she made in 2017 was a rape revenge movie called Revenge. Second Sight put it out, by the way, on Blu-ray in a great box set. So again, a woman, and some of these French directors who have been dealing baseball. I mean, there's been so many great female French directors that have delved into their sexuality and body horror because the French aren't fearful of that kind of thing. The French will dive in where American people fear to tread when it comes to their sexuality and examining all those things. And for French women, they've been particularly fearless in this area. You know, movies like High Tension. I mean, there's all kinds of, and we talked about Julia Ducournau, of course, Titane and Raw. But when I read about this movie in Cannes. And for those of you who don't know, in The Substance, Demi Moore plays a character named Elizabeth Sparkle, and she's 50 years old, and she's been teaching, or she's been a television personality She's like Jane Fonda in the 80s. Jane Fonda, if you don't remember, Jane Fonda pioneered her aerobics tapes with like the best-selling videotapes every year, VHS tapes. Everybody bought them. Everybody had Jane Fonda. Everyone's mom was doing the Jane Fonda workout, or they wanted to. They'd buy the tape and think it was just through osmosis they were going to get into Jane Fonda shape, but whatever. So Demi Moore's character at 50 gets fired from the network, and because she's too old. The accelerated decrepitude has taken its course, and she's a fitness instructor. And as Dennis Quaid says, we need somebody young and hot. And of course, immediately, this is a tale as old as time. Women have been dealing with this. I mean, mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest one of all? I'm old, you're young. You create a lot of stuff there. But so Demi Moore finds out that there is a mysterious organization, a medical something that has created this thing called the substance. And the substance, as they say, I'm sure if you saw it on the trailer, it unlocks your DNA. And what it does is it splits you into into two. And literally a younger version of yourself, probably 20, 30 years younger, literally emerges from inside of you. And I won't get into all the joys of this movie, but I want to talk about, because you got to see it. You can't be told what the substance is. It's like the Matrix. You have to see it for yourself. As Major Chai pointed out, the Matrix is a nest. So, and what happens is you are now split into two, and you get to live your life for 7 days while your younger self is eating this paste. It's being pumped into you. And then you switch. So your younger self goes to live out her life for 7 days, and your older body, has to wait for her to come back. But as they tell you, you're still one individual. Even though you're split into two, you are one. And it goes from there. And the less you know about the movie going in, the better, even though people probably know all about it. But when I heard about this, medical technology making you split into two, somebody emerges from somebody. I'm like, I was so fucking in. I was so in. Oh my God. I couldn't wait to see this movie. And then when it was playing in Toronto and people were just like, oh my God. And I'm like, I was like They Came From Within, 13-year-old Bobby B. I'm like, I heard there's lots of nudity in it, a lot of crazy body horror stuff happening. I'm like, oh my God. I mean, I'm telling you. I'm a fiend for body horror if it's good. There's been a lot of bad body horror, but I could not wait. So anyway, I figure I would, this British Vogue has an article, little by Alyssa Sue, and this article in British Vogue was published on the 19th, 2 days ago, and it's an interview with the director. So I figured I'd share that with you first. Since premiering at the Cannes Film Festival earlier this year, Coralie Fargeat's The Substance, or Coralie Fargeat's The Substance, has ignited fervent discussions and reactions. The film centers on Elizabeth Sparkle, Demi Moore, a Jane Fonda-esque actor and fitness icon who is abruptly laid off from her TV show by a misogynistic producer. Desperate to reclaim her relevance, she turns to The Substance, a black market treatment that allows her to spawn Sue, a younger, better version of herself. The two versions cannot coexist, however, so Elizabeth must alternate between herself and her alternate every 7 days, or else. Driven by bold visuals, pulsating music, and minimal dialogue, The Substance delivers a lurid and merciless critique of society's unsustainable beauty standards. Fargeat wrote the prize-winning script after turning 40 as she grappled with feelings of obsolescence and inadequacy. I had these massive thoughts that I had reached the age where I wasn't going to be useful or interesting to anyone anymore, says Fargeat. The violence and those thoughts were so strong that I had to do something about it, otherwise it would totally destroy and crush me. And what better way to illustrate the challenges of societal pressure and self-worth than through a female actor? Influenced by body horror titans like David Cronenberg and John Carpenter, Fargeat's film delves into the themes of rebirth and hypersexualization. At every age, we can find something wrong with ourselves, which can make us feel like monsters, the French filmmaker says. Your image defines you and your self-worth. But I thought that if I could create something meaningful about these issues, it would also serve as a form of liberation. The substances themes have been with you for a long time, but I'm curious, when you actually wrote the script, this is the interviewer, because of injected substances almost feels like Ozempic. It was maybe 5 years ago. Ozempic wasn't around, but we had many other Ozempics in the past. In France, we had other medical procedures used to suppress your appetite and make you lose weight. Women took amphetamines to stay thin or drank powders that were supposed to be some magic diet replacement. Ozempic is just a new incarnation of something that's been around since the beginning. The fact that the movie has any resonance is great, but at the same time tells me that, unfortunately, the issue is still very much around. The author says, I read that Demi Moore had never heard of body horror before signing on to this film. How did you prepare her for the role, since the movie is not shy in that respect? We had many preliminary conversations before starting work on the film because in addition to the usual preparation for her performance, we needed to consider the extensive level of prosthetics for the body horror element. Basically, there are a lot of constraints during shooting because prosthetics are so time-consuming and don't always make for the most logical or rational approach to acting. It's super important to make sure actors know that so they can adapt. And of course, we discussed the level of nudity that the movie required. The script was quite explicit, and I wrote every shot in detail, so I wanted to make sure we walked through everything in advance, especially the meaning behind each scene so nothing felt gratuitous. Most important for me and her was grasping the purpose of these scenes, how and why the nudity was serving what the movie was all about, how it's a way to show our vulnerability with our own bodies, and how the way we look at the flesh can be so different when you're alone in your bathroom or you're Sue in front of the camera and everyone else is looking at your ass. Speaking of Sue, how did you come up with that name? When she first appears, you don't expect her to say a name that's so old-fashioned and common for someone her age. It came during the writing. To me, the name embodies a Marilyn Monroe vibe, like an old Lolita, baby doll, sexy icon type. It evokes the past, and subconsciously, it was a way for me to symbolically reference the images and representations of the past that shape today's expectation of what is beautiful, sexy, and valued. It's something I preserved unconsciously with the name. Speaking of classic Hollywood actresses and needing to look a certain way, I noticed you use the main theme from Vertigo, a movie that is also very much about a man attempting to mold a woman to his liking. Totally, says Coralie. At first, it was just supposed to be a placeholder when I was editing because I didn't have a composer on board yet. It's delicate and feminine and felt fitting to what I wanted to express in the scene. The kind of softness and reverie of a perfect actress contrasting with the monstrous figure. Like before, it's also a link to cinema and how cinema has shaped these kinds of archetypes. When I finally collaborated with the composer, we realized how well this music conveyed the symbolism of that moment, so we made sure to keep it. Can you talk about the film's color palette? Elizabeth wears a very striking yellow peacoat that makes her very conspicuous. Was there any meaning behind that? My scripts don't have backstories, so I only get to know the character through a few key details, what she does, where she lives, and how she dresses. So all of these images need to present themselves symbolically in a way that works for the movie. I don't always know why certain elements resonate with me, but I feel strongly about them. Yellow felt like it was right for her. I wanted to place her in a superhero-like space, representing her as Elizabeth Sparkle before her transformation. Other colors are chosen more consciously. I knew I wanted Sue to have the poppy femininity of pink, which is a bit like the oldest living symbol for that kind of thing. The world the movie takes place in feels just one step removed from reality. At times it feels like we're in Elizabeth's head, which makes sense since body issues can be so internal. Was this how you envisioned it when writing the film? From the start, I knew I wasn't interested in depicting the real Hollywood, but rather what it's about. It's about beauty. It's about success. Taking it out of our reality was a way to make it timeless and universal, like the story could happen today, yesterday, or tomorrow, as well as anywhere. I wanted the locations and set decorations to have a very strong symbolic meaning. Each of the locations represents something. For instance, the long orange corridor at the TV network represents Elizabeth's life. She started at some point on one end and then is finished when she reaches the other. Having these strong visual statements from the start can suggest to the audience that we are in a distinct world that has its own rules. We don't care about realism or reality. We're in the world of the substance. I gave the same explanation to my crew when designing the apartment. It was important for it to have a timeless, old-fashioned, but also futuristic quality that could represent every age, every kind of world, while also being rich in symbolism. The large window connects the inside and outside and lets Elizabeth gaze at her past, which at one point is taken from her. When Sue is reborn, the view becomes the future. The white bathroom, where all her transformations occur, serves as a cocoon where she confronts herself, almost like an experimental chamber. It's a mental space, and I wanted it to feel very abstract, stylized, and almost empty. I remember my production designer asking, "Are you sure you don't want any furniture in the bathroom at all?" And that's all I'm going to read of this article, because I don't want to spoil anything for people who haven't seen it. But I will say this. I found The Substance wildly entertaining. I did get the body horror. I don't think it's a perfect film. It might be my favorite film of the year, though, because of the things that it touched on and the way it was so audaciously presented. The really interesting thing about The Substance is I'm always talking about verisimilitude. This movie walks a really interesting line of fantasy land and reality. And tonally, I think the French are better at this than Americans. Like certain Japanese directors, there is a whimsy in a lot of French cinema that I don't think Americans have or get. This is dark fantasy horror, body horror whimsy, but one of my favorite movies of all time is Amélie. And Amélie is a very whimsical film. The way it's shot is whimsical. The color palette is whimsical. The storyline is whimsical. And yet that movie makes me cry every time I see it, multiple times. I'm not comparing this to Amélie, but there is a certain dark horror whimsy as well, and this movie has it in spades. And is this movie some, intellectual puzzle? Is it like Tarkovsky's Stalker? No. This movie is like going to a punk rock show. Like I've said, it's as if Verhoeven and Cronenberg got together, did a bunch of drugs, came up with a movie, and made something together. But it wasn't the two of them. It was a French woman, and she killed it. And she is somebody to watch. Only her second feature. Coralie Fargeat. Coralie Fargeat, remember that name. She's gone to the top of my list. Number one with the bullet of people who have something to say in their movies. Now, I've got one more article to read about this, but I'm not going to do it now because I want to see what you guys have to say. And I know that there's a lot of people. I've seen a lot of people have some chats come in, so I'm going to start answering those. Port Film Co-op sends in a super chat and says, it's better to give up and separate from modern movies. Not when something like this comes out, it's not. Hope springs eternal. And the studios might be, but we're going to have a revolution where people are going to go back. It's going to come back around. So yeah, I'm not that pessimistic. Garrett Groover says, in your opinion, what does Andor have that puts it over the other Star Wars shows? What makes it a cut above the rest? I think what makes it a cut above the rest is what it's trying to say. The problem that I have with most Star Wars shows and most Star Wars now is it's only about the Star Wars universe itself. Star Wars doesn't have much left to say to me beyond that. Andor is a show. First of all, Andor is about why have a rebellion? What's at stake? Why do it? And, when Luthen gives his great speech, I'm fighting for a sunset I'll never see. The level of writing in his speech, go watch Luthen's speech. There's nothing remotely similar to that in any modern, Star Wars has had a chance. This idea that Star Wars is for kids or should be made to be as simplistic as it is, the Book of Boba Fett should have been a banger of a show. It should have been about Boba Fett climbing his way. It should have been the King of New York of Star Wars movies. It should have been somebody consolidating their power and taking over the underworld in the Star Wars universe. I think that Star Wars has become moribund, And the shows that we've been seeing, it's always about the same, oh, we can't make an Obi-Wan show and have him not fight Anakin Skywalker. Really? Really? Because the only thing that Obi-Wan Kenobi ever had going in his entire life was that? There's so many stories. Look to what Lucas was doing when he was first inspired by Star Wars. Look to Kurosawa. Look to Kurosawa and figure out, adapt another one of his movies. Adapt High and Low in the Star Wars universe. Do something else. Give me something that isn't like a movie about a lightsaber duel. I mean, it's funny. If you watch the original Star Wars, it's a story about two guys rescuing a princess and a rebellion that's about to get squashed by the Empire. The Jedi aspects of it are very small, but it's really about the wars part of the Star Wars section. And that's what Andor was about. Andor was about, if there's a rebellion against the Galactic Empire, how did that rebellion start? Who started it? Who were the people on the moons of Yavin? That's why people say, the show is so boring. No, it's boring because you've decided you only want to see one section. All you care about is the Jedi Knights and lightsabers, Dark Lords of the Sith. But what about the people in the Yavin base? Where'd those people come from? How did they get there? General Reichian on Hoth. Who are these people? They have nothing to do with the Force or the Sith or anything. They're warriors. They're a ragtag army that is trying to defeat the Empire. Andor was about that side of the Star Wars universe. And people are like, I want more Star Wars in my Star Wars. I'm like, well, this is a side that went unexplored until Andor. And that side, for me, is more of an adult, is far more interesting because the Clone Wars shows were good. I liked what everybody did in that animated series. A lot of it was quite good, but I'm so bored of that. I don't care if I see a Star Wars movie with anybody. Get rid of the Sith. I don't care. I don't care about Jedi Knights. I don't care about the Force. Just give me movies set in the Star Wars universe that deal with other things. But anyway, that's why Andor, I loved it so much. Andor was a movie or a TV series made for adults. But anyway, Darth Dragonborn says, where the fuck is The Last Samurai in 4K? Don't get me started about Warner Brothers. Their 100th anniversary, there's half their great movies. I mean, The Last Samurai, maybe Criterion will put it out. I don't know where The Last Samurai is. I love that movie. It should be out in 4K, just like Excalibur. Tom Jr. Jackson says, but Rob, it's the 2,000-year-old man. It's true. I love that. You're right, Tom. You're a cultured man to know what that is. Dee's Webos has been a member for 23 months. Thank you for that. John Kokoza says, wow, I just got out of the theater. The Substance. Wow. That's the creative movies we need. The cinematography, makeup effects, and actors were great. You know what, John? If nothing else, it's not like anything you've seen before. It's actually something new and different. And you could say, oh yeah, it's Death Becomes Her meets the Picture of Dorian Gray meets Showgirls, whatever. Yeah. In a different way through a French lens. And it's 2 hours and 20 minutes and it's a banger. And I was wildly entertained. Not only was that movie a great body horror film, but it was one of the most entertaining films I've seen in a long time. I knew I would love it just from the opening shot with an egg and then the shot of the star on Hollywood Boulevard. Loved it. Shonen Kaiju says, The Substance is brilliant. The first shot made me think of Jurassic Park, and the word Jurassic is used later in the film. Coincidence? I think not. Oh, I think it's no coincidence. You're absolutely right there. John Kokoza says, having photographed models for 25 years, I've seen firsthand beauty insecurities females can have and extreme measures they engage in body augmentation. John, me too. I'll tell you something. I don't usually talk about this, but as people know, I directed 5 episodes of the Cinemax anthology series Femme Fatales, which was a late night Skinemax show, but we tried to inject it with some noir feel, and it was an ongoing anthology show, but it had sex. And when we were casting the show, part of the reason that we cast the show is because it had sexual content. We had to cast hot girls and hot guys, and the network had to approve them. And I'll tell you something, it was monumentally depressing because everybody that came in, all the women that came in, and to a certain extent the guys, but the women had to take their tops off. And you're in a casting session, and so many of them had bad breast augmentation. And I've also been on porn sets, and I've seen better breast augmentation, but bad breast augmentation is depressing. And I totally related to that. And I'm like, wow. And the pressure there is enormous, and I can understand that. I'm not saying people can do whatever they want to their bodies, but the difference between the quality of the augmentation is vast. And I feel sorry for people that can't. It's like anything else. You have to have it done correctly by real professionals to know what they're doing. I'm not a fan of it. I think women's bodies are beautiful no matter what shape, size they are. I'm a fan of all of it. But yeah, I know you. I'm right there with you. Carnal says, "Hey R&B and hail to the Post-Geek Singularity. Rob, if you could indulge me with your long appreciation of the genre, but when was the earliest you can recall using the term body horror in film?" Probably the first time I remember seeing it or hearing about it was, I want to say, in the early 80s. It had to be the early 80s. And this might not be correct, but there was a book on Cronenberg's work called The Shape of Rage. There was a book that came out later, but The Shape of Rage was early. I was published, had to have been early 80s. I love that book. It was a critical overview of Cronenberg's movies up to that point. And I seem to remember, and body horror in also like Fangoria magazine. So it had to be early 80s, the first time I heard that term. But it's always been something that stuck with me. But I've used it ever since, because that's really what it was. But that's what I seem to remember. Good question though. Torn to Watch Studio says, "Are you saying this film is the Raiders of the Lost Ark? Spielberg and Lucas of horror teaming up of horror?" No, I wouldn't say that. Because she didn't team up with anybody. It's her movie. Torn to Watch Studio says, "French films have a whimsy and Japanese films have a gruffness. And last night I saw a Mexican film, Victims of Sin at a Noir Festival, and learned that their films always run hot. Understanding that makes them better." Yeah, go see the Mexican horror film We Are the Flesh, man. That's a rough one too. It's true, but I also think, I guess I'm thinking the whimsy in Japanese culture comes, you see it a lot in anime. The Matsumoto Leiji with Galaxy Express and Space Battleship Yamato and all that, putting trains in space and battleships in space and pirate ships in space. Message from Space has is it Jalusia? The planet, you have a big 3-masted sailing ship in space. A Silly Goose says, "Have you seen Transformers 1? I have not yet. I'll probably get around to it." I have to say, I was never a Transformers guy. I mean, I saw Michael Bay's movies, but I never really watched the animated series. It was I was too old for it. Yeah. It looks great. People said it was great. I really like Bumblebee. I thought it was great. I actually like Michael Bay's first Transformers movie too. And I have a soft spot for Dark of the Moon. A Silly Goose, I can't speak. A Silly Goose says, or has been a member for 23 months. So thank you for that question. The Dead Man says, "Hello, Chief Running Mouth." Hello, the Dead Man. Major Chai Chai says, "Happy birthday, Rob." Well, happy birthday to you. And happy birthday to me too. So thank you for that. And thanks for that letter and sharing your experience going to see Blazing Saddles. I very much appreciated that. That you shared that with us. I don't know. I'm not seeing this. I don't know why I'm not getting the tips. I know people have sent tips in, and I'm trying to log back in to get them. I don't know why they are not there, but I will see. Now, I have another article that I would like to read because it is a dissenting view. Definitely a dissenting view. And I think that you guys will find this quite interesting. So this is the last article I want to read about this movie. It is a review, and it's not a good review, but it was written by a female reviewer, and I thought I would share it. So this comes to us from Slate. And Dana Stevens wrote this on September 18th. And the substance lacks any. Demi Moore's new movie is supposed to be the feminist horror event of the year, and I hated it. By Dana Stevens. When I read back in the spring that Coralie Fargeat's The Substance was the most divisive movie at Cannes, it got the festival's longest standing ovation, 11 minutes, and the award for Best Screenplay, while also occasioning multiple mid-screening walkouts, I thought I knew which side of the divide I would fall on. An over-the-top body horror thriller about an injectable drug that allows a fading star to swap bodies with a younger, hotter woman who is almost, but not quite her, with gnarly special effects achieved mainly via prostheses and makeup rather than CGI, directed by a middle-aged woman. Lay it on me, especially if it stars Demi Moore, the brat packer turned Hollywood fixture of my cinematic youth, in what everyone is saying is the role of a lifetime. The premise sounded familiar, sure, but the movie it evokes are all enduring classics of the horror genre. John Frankenheimer's Seconds, David Cronenberg's The Fly, John Carpenter's The Thing, Brian Houston's Society, but she doesn't say that. So I went into The Substance hype for, at the very least, some down and dirty pulp thrills. And if I was lucky, Fargeat's sophomore feature might be as primally cathartic as those reliable nightmare generators. Like them, it revolves around the fear of biological transformation into something horrifyingly other. An uncanny younger double, a man-fly hybrid, a human head skittering about on spider legs. In the case of The Substance, though, the object of horror is simply a woman who has reached the shriek-inducing age of 50. A feminist twist that struck me as original and witty, not to mention long overdue. I'm disappointed to report that I found The Substance lacking in both departments. The oh no, they didn't gross out quotient and the intellectual heft. The fleshy transmogrifications the viewer witnesses again and again as Moore's Elizabeth Sparkle injects herself with the glowing yellow-green substance for her weekly identity swap with Sue grow more and more abjectly disgusting as both women's physical and moral conditions degrade. But the fact of the switch means the same thing each time. Elizabeth has sold her soul and her last chance at earthly happiness to cling to the illusion of eternal youth, all in the service of a cruel and insatiable patriarchy. After 2 hours and 20 minutes of flamboyantly repulsive variations on this well-worn theme, even the strongest stomached and most feminist of viewers could be excused for muttering, "We get it already." Elizabeth, a once celebrity big enough to earn a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, though she seems to have been known primarily as the host of an aerobic show. Is that a problem for you? Anyway, fears getting old so much that she signs on to an obviously Faustian bargain proposed by a mysterious, smooth-faced stranger. For 7 days of every 14, she will continue to live in her own less than youthful but still fit and gorgeous body in the glamorous high-rise apartment paid for by her lengthy career as America's official hot girl. For the next 7, that self will go into a coma-like state of hibernation, nourished with food from a tube, while the impossibly attractive Sue assumes the hot girl mantle, hosting a revamped version of the same TV show in a skimpier bubblegum pink leotard. A representative from the never-named company that provides the substance periodically reminds the women that they are two different manifestations of the same being, so any deviation from company rules will end up harming them both. But this relationship between Elizabeth and Sue, who because their bodies share a single consciousness, never see each other in a waking state, soon becomes a ferocious rivalry as each tries to wrangle a few extra days of embodiment or to take revenge on the other by leaving figurative and literal messes for her to clean up when the week rolls around. Nothing in the foregoing description would preclude The Substance from being good or even great movie. What made it so tedious and grating for me was not the concept of the execution. Fargeat approaches her material with a hatchet, hacking methodically away but rarely sculpting with any nuance. Fans of The Substance may object that her bluntness is a deliberate style choice and that the filmmaker would no doubt agree. But setting style aside to the extent that it is ever possible, what exactly are the ideas at play in The Substance? If the film is meant as social satire, it's hard to discern its target other than an abstract notion of oppressive beauty standards in which neither the beauty industry nor the social media plays any significant role. The entertainment industry comes into focus only glancingly, personified by a single, seldom seen character. Elizabeth's and later Sue's boss, a piggish TV executive unsubtly named Harvey and played by Dennis Quaid. Harvey is shot mainly in tight close-up through a fisheye lens, his face warped into a monstrous mask. Stuffing his face with luridly pink shellfish, he unceremoniously fires Elizabeth before turning his pervy leer on the more nubile and compliant Sue. I'm not asking for detailed character portraits of Harvey the Lecher, but after 2 or 3 scenes establishing that he is a sexist bore, the character's presence becomes nothing more than a drag. Similarly, the many scenes in Elizabeth's futuristic all-white bathroom in which the women enact a series of procedures that will enable them to switch places all started to blend together in my mind. The devolutionary logic of body horror demands that each successive switch be more and more horrendous than the last, which the fast-aging Elizabeth acting as the portrait of Dorian Gray, while Sue serves as the preternaturally radiant real-life Dorian. There's no shortage of repulsive and sometimes darkly funny imagery as we watch these two symbiotic beings disintegrate in unison, but with their characters and the story as a whole remaining more or less static during the scenes in between, these moments of metamorphosis ceased to scare or shock me. Instead, I started to resent the movie's self-satisfied posturings, the way it kept proudly trotting out twists any viewer reasonably versed in film history could have seen coming. At a highly pitched emotional moment near the end, the score by the one-named composer Rafferty references one of the most famous music cues in cinematic history, the spiraling love and death theme of Bernard Herrmann's score for Vertigo, adapted from a similar leitmotif in Wagner's Tristan and Isolde, just as was the case when Michael, I can't pronounce his last name, used that cue in the soundtrack of his silent film pastiche, The Artist. The effect is to take anyone who's seen Vertigo directly out of the experience of watching the movie in front of them and make them start ruminating about why any filmmaker in their right mind would lift such a familiar theme. A later snippet from Richard Strauss, Thus Spake Zarathustra, makes similarly clumsy use of a musical passage universally associated with 2001: A Space Odyssey. Is the intention here to parody the films being sampled, to pay them homage, or to simply goose the audience's attention with an easily recognizable burst of music preladen with emotional significance? Fargeat makes it hard to tell what these borrowings are meant to accomplish besides hitting us over the head. Though I disliked it with a passion, the substance, unlike some other feminist thrillers of recent years, Emerald Fennell's Promising Young Woman comes to mind, is not a pernicious or reprehensible movie. It never sends a message opposite to the one it intends to convey, and that message about the emotional and corporeal violence of societally reinforced female body dysphoria is timely and urgent. If anything, the problem is that the message and the vehicle used to convey it are too much in sync. Fargeat's clobbering approach leaves no space for the audience to speculate or to make our own connections and discoveries. I will concede that the casting of Demi Moore was a masterstroke on Fargeat's part, given that the actress's reputation for pushing back on body-related taboos. Moore was, to my memory, the first celebrity to pose nude for a magazine cover while pregnant, and later made the then bold move of shaving her head and building a muscular physique to play a soldier in G.I. Jane. Moore's lived an experience of fame, and in the few scenes where Elizabeth gets more to do than react with horror to her latest mutation, Moore explores the bottomless activity of a woman whose self-worth depends on maintaining a flawless exterior. One of the rare scenes not to depend on gory effects for drama shows Elizabeth sabotaging herself as she readies for a date with a former high school classmate. She puts on a full face of makeup, smears it off, reapplies it in a different style, then stares critically in the mirror as the time set for the date ticks past. The moment is poignant, and the break from the grand guignol is welcome, but the movie soon ramps up to its former visceral intensity. All squelchy wounds and necrotic extremities. As for Margaret Qualley, while her dance background gives her exercise, show scenes a convincing kineticism, Sue gets even less character development than her older double. In close-up shots that appear intended to reconstruct the male gaze on Sue's twerking nether parts, Fargeat's camera, the cinematographer is Benjamin Carricoon, does its own fair share of narratively pointless oogling. I haven't read much coverage of the substance since its initial reviews at Cannes, but I have the feeling I will be in the minority in my response to what seems like a general crowd pleaser. Yes, it is. And isn't that enough sometimes? If, like most of the body horror classics it channels, This movie had clocked in at under 2 hours. I might have experienced it as the gritty exploitation flick it seemed to want to be, but at 140 minutes it felt endless and repetitive. When Elizabeth and Sue, or whatever organic matter remained of them, met their final fate, with the help of some spectacular makeup effects from Pierre-Olivier Persin, my main sensation was one of relief that my suffering, not theirs, was over. If ooky Cronenbergian horror, filmed with unremitting forcefulness, is your personal cup of tea, or addictive syringe of neon yellow liquid, please enjoy. Just don't try and convince me that this leaden message movie actually has anything interesting to say. Yeesh. There you go. Female director not liking The Substance, which is okay. You don't have to love everything. I get it. I loved it. I was thoroughly entertained, and it is 2 hours and 20 minutes, and it went by lickety-split, and I totally enjoyed it. Not really understanding why people didn't, but hey, I get it. Steve Catania says, Rob, how come nobody goes to the movies on weekends anymore? Been going to big releases every weekend this month, big titles, empty every time. Is it just that I'm old, or is everyone at home doing smack? Where do I go? Peace. I guess it depends on what theater you go to, because, you know, for the theaters that I'm going to, well, unfortunately, Steve, there wasn't many people seeing The Substance when I was there. I wish that there were more, but there weren't. Which was kind of a bummer, and I don't know really why. I don't know why that is, which I guess it depends where you live, really. I mean, I love going to the movies so much, and I like to do it whenever I can. I really do. Whenever I can. So I don't know. It's depressing to hear. But for me, the thing about The Substance, that first and foremost, it was a new concept that I hadn't seen before. It was presented in a really interesting, intriguing way. Would I have liked to know more about who made this substance and why? Sure. Let's leave that for the sequel. And if I was going to criticize the movie, my one criticism of it was obviously things have to go awry pretty fast, but when you're told, I did think that there was a really interesting thing with youth that was not mentioned in this woman's review, that young people think rules don't apply to them. I'll tell you a funny story that happened to me this week. So in our backyard, the Robservatory, this is a garage. The Robservatory is a garage. And the garage door is this way, and I have a back door out that way. And I've got a ton. I'm always moving stuff around. There's so many boxes of crap in here. I have a large 6th scale snow speeder from The Empire Strikes Back that was made by a company called Jazz Inc. And I had moved it. I was moving stuff around and building more shelves, and I had moved it outside. It was sitting outside on a bunch of boxes. Because it's really heavy, it was a gentle place to set it down. And the only people that we have some people that come once a week into our backyard to do some work. And they had picked they had a young kid that was working with them, like an intern, and came in, was working with them, and then left. Well, I came back, and my snow speeder was going to actually spend the overnight being outside while I moved stuff around. When I came back, and the snow speeder is very large, it was gone. The snow speeder that I paid off over 2 years, it was gone. I mean, it's a huge, heavy object. Well, the only person that would even know it was there were the people that were working in our backyard and this young person they had working with them. And they all came together. So I called him up and I said, look, I don't want to accuse anybody of anything, but this thing that's mine that I really love was taken. And I know you guys didn't take it. And I was trying to explain, because I told these guys, well, it's a spaceship model, actually a snow speeder model. And I told them about it. And a week goes by, I get a call from these guys that work for us. And the funny thing about it is the guy, I kid you not, the guy who works for us, his name is Luke. So I was like, Luke, you got to find your snow speeder buddy for me, buddy. And it turns out that the kid that was working for them who saw this came back in the middle of the night to come back, went into our backyard and stole it. Stole the snow speeder. And the funny thing was it was enough that I was going to call the police. It's a big thing. Huge thing. But what was interesting is the kid who took it, I said this in anticipation. I said to Luke, I go, listen, I have to explain something to you. When it comes out, because I knew this kid had to have been the one to take, because Luke, he's a sports guy, he doesn't give a fuck about a snow speeder. And I said, this kid, when you see what it is, because I was trying to explain to Luke what it is, and he couldn't fathom, like, what, is it a model? Like, he thought it was this little tiny thing. I go, when you see it, it's huge. Like, if you're going to put it in a car, you'd have to have it. You couldn't put it in, like, the front seat of a car. It's too big to fit. And the fact is, the person who took it saw it. It was a premeditated, it was a heist. Somebody saw it. It was in our backyard, in my backyard, right outside my office door. And somebody had to think about it. And I said, only a young person would have, and I go, I'll be very curious what they will say. Because when you go over there, they're going to scramble. And once they know they're caught, if they admit it, because there was no way. And apparently that's what happened. The kid, I guess, lives with his grandfather and made up this cockamamie story and all this. Oh, I didn't know. I thought it was just garbage. And it was so funny when the guy gives it back. And because kids, young people, especially young people today, I've never seen, they're missing something. I don't know if it's helicopter parenting, but there is an element of believing that if it's something that they want, they get it. Well, in the case of these particular guys, they work at other people's homes. Their business is to service homes. And people let them do work in their homes because they trust them. And when you have a kid that's working for you that proves that they can't be trusted, it puts a lot of, like, this kid was not thinking that he put his employers into any kind of trouble. But I would have had to call the police had I not got this thing back. Because there's only one people, no one else knew it was there. It was this random, nobody would else have known it was there. And that's kind of what the substance has in it. It has an element, and this woman didn't see it, she didn't mention it, but Margaret Qualley's character, you're invulnerable. You don't have to follow the rules. Oh, if I want to go out with my friends and do this thing, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what's at stake. There's a thing that young people think that they are no longer obligated to other people. I've noticed this in working environments. And I'm not criticizing, I'm not saying every young person, but I didn't used to see that. I mean, young people have always been, young, dumb, and full of cum. I get that. But I knew when I had a job, I was obligated to go to my job. I knew that I couldn't get away with, if you have other people that you are obligated to, you had that instilled in you that you better do a good job. But nowadays that's changed, I think. And maybe I can be naive because I'm an old man and I think it's the way it's supposed to be, but it was instilled in me. I always had jobs when I was younger. And it was the kind of thing where you didn't do stuff like that. But this kid was scrambling around trying to make up excuses about what could have possibly. You went back to a house that wasn't yours. You went into a yard, into somebody's backyard that wasn't yours. And I knew when he did it because the dogs went crazy. It was the middle of the night. And took something. And I found that, and that's why that was something, this has just happened. So when I saw the substance, I'd found out they found my snow speeder. And when I was watching Margaret Qualley's performance, and I'm like, she starts, here are the rules. Here's the way you're supposed to play it. And she's like, fuck it. They don't apply to me. And things spin off into oblivion. But it really resonated with me seeing a young person just decide that, no, they don't apply to me. I don't have to put up with them. And I thought that was a really interesting thing that was in the movie. So I understand the movie didn't work for that woman, but there are rules, and you got to play it. You got to play it correctly, or you're going to get in trouble. Steve Cantagno's back and says, I know the shifting times, but it just makes me kind of sad, like I'm watching Killer's Game, and I'm watching Killer's Game, and Sofia Boutella, who I've been rooting for to be a huge star, now here's her moment, and nobody's here. Well, that movie didn't do very well. You know, I think in that case, look, I think one of the real problems is nowadays the only movies anybody knows that are coming out are big studio releases because they have the marketing dollars behind them. So crazy. Torna Watch Studio says Ray Liotta was originally cast as Harvey, but died before filming his scenes. Dennis Quaid was cast as a result. Ray would have been perfect. Yeah, Dennis was good though too. I didn't know that. That's interesting. RRTNZ says, Hail Bob, hope you're well. Been very busy with work. That's great. But sooner or later, I'll drop in for a member chat. Until then, when Chuck Norris plays dodgeball, the balls dodge him. Cheers, mate. Well, thank you for that. Always cheers to you. You know, I really enjoyed The Substance. For first and foremost, I thought I was entertained by it. And while sure, was it on the nose? Sure, of course. But it was still part of it's not just the message. Part of it's how you get there. And after all, movies are supposed to be entertaining. They're supposed to entertain you. They don't all have to be a polemic on certain things. But I thought as a horror film, ultimately it is also supposed to be a horror film. So, yeah. Anyway, I think I'm going to bring an end to this chat. I think everybody should go see The Substance. Get back to me and tell me what you thought. I really enjoyed it. It lived up to my expectations, and we shall see what you guys think. How it's going to do this weekend, I don't know. Kudos to Mubi for picking it up. Mubi's a really interesting distribution company. They picked up a movie last year that I really love called a Korean film called Decision to Leave. And they released that, although Mubi's going to do the same thing they did with Decision to Leave. They're going to release The Substance on Blu-ray, and then like 6 months later, they're going to put out the 4K. That's bullshit, Mubi. Give us the 4K and the Blu-ray at the same time. Would you do that? Don't make us double dip, because I'm not going to do it. You fooled me once, and I'm not going to do it again. But anyway, yeah, go see The Substance. What do you guys think of body horror? What are your favorite body horror films? What do you think of all that? Put it down in the comments. And of course, if you're interested, you can still pre-order. You heard a little snippet of it in the opening of the show. You can still pre-order True Noir, The Assassination of Anton Cermak. Obviously, it stars Michael Rosenbaum as Nathan Heller, and David Strathairn plays Frank Nitti. Katie Sackhoff plays Janie Doherty. There's so many cool actors in this project. I'm so proud of it. You can go to truenoir.co to our Kickstarter page and pre-order it. The Dead Man says, Gary took a sad song and made it better. I hope he did. All right, which Gary are you referring to? Nerdrotic? But yeah, Sonia, what'd you think? What'd you think of the movie? I want to know. And if you guys have any other topics you want me to discuss or delve into, and if I'm sharing too much of my life, then tell me. But on that note, I want to thank Tom Jr. Jackson for being a great moderator. I want to thank everybody for generously supporting this channel via super chats and tips. I want to thank my members. We had a great member chat today. I have member chats every other Saturday when I can, and I'm not working. And yeah, so pre-order True Noir. It's turning out great, I think. And you guys are going to love it, I think, if you like audio dramas. Certainly, we are working hard on it. And on that note, find Dieter, Bastian, and I tomorrow. We will be back with the latest episode of Let's Get Physical Media. And remember, every person you meet... Oh, Gary Gnu. Gary Gnu from the Great Space Coaster. Gary Gnu at the news. The news with Gary Gnu. That's another great reference. Elizabeth and I talk about Gary Gnu all the time. On that note, remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear, and all you have to do. No news is good news with Gary Gnu. All you have to do is listen. So remember, listen to other people. And on that note, Carl Kim says the audio quality of True Noir is great. Oh, no, wait, you haven't heard anything yet. Wait until you hear it. We haven't even mixed it yet. We're just putting it all together. Go see The Substance.